Currently, I'm the COO of SiGMA. Yes, my previous role was CEO of the MGA. It was about 5 years ago. And as the CEO of MGA, obviously I was overlooking all the licensed entities who were in possession of an MGA license.
Thank you. From your experience, what factors made Malta such an attractive jurisdiction for regulated gaming businesses, and how did MGA contribute to building that reputation?
I think the biggest thing for Malta and for the MJ was the first mover advantage. At the time when the regulations were set up, Malta was one of the first countries, one of the first EU states to start regulating, and that first mover advantage gave Malta the advantage of having even startup companies who were looking at this industry to start operating in a regulated way. At the time, there were a number of companies who were operating without any regulations. So the moment Malta came up with a set of regulations for this industry, a number of operators took the opportunity to start get properly regulated, and that was, I believe, a huge advantage for Malta.
Thank you. Based on your years at MGA, what were the main steps and challenges companies typically faced when applying for a license? Where did they most often need guidance or clarification?
Well, ultimately, the toughest part of any license is to have all the requirements necessary to get the license. Even though many who are not in the industry do not really know exactly what goes behind the license, the amount of documentation, especially in relation to the source of wealth, the source of funds of a company, the ownership of a company, there are a number of documents which need to be presented before actually obtaining a license. Apart from that, there is a lot which goes around the technical aspect. So the technical aspect, a regulator, not just the MGA, any regulator doesn't just give you a license. For you to obtain the license and be allowed to operate and offer your services to players, to consumers, you need to make sure that you are in line, even from a technical perspective, where you are holding the data, the player data. Is it stored in a proper way? Are the player details protected? How are the payments being processed? What the payments flow? How are you processing all the funds of players? So it's quite a detailed exercise in order to obtain a license.
Thank you. During your tenure, player protection was always a key priority. What practical safeguards did the MGA require, and which of them proved the most impactful in real-world cases?
Well, I think player protection is key for any regulator, not just the MGA. So it is one of the main reasons why regulators exist, and that is to protect the players. Without the regulators, we are not so sure that players will be protected in the same manner. Each and every regulator is there to make sure that all the requirements which are related to protecting the players, like for example, there are a number of measures on the duration a player can play, to check the actual means, the actual funds, whether or not the player affords to play all that amount of money. Regulators impose a number of requirements in relation to harm reduction, but also to anticipate. So if through AI systems, and nowadays a number of operators use AI systems, if through an AI system the pattern of a particular player, especially new players, is resembling that of a problem gambler, so the operator is bound by the obligations they have via the regulators to take action before actually allowing the player to become a problem gambler. And there are a number of measures which regulators need to take care of.
Thank you. In your view, how effective are the current procedures for handling player complaints and disputes, and how these evolved over time between operators, the MGA, and ADR entities?
Well, ultimately, the reason why there are the ADRs nowadays, basically that. It is because there was the need, and the industry felt that not all, I wouldn't say all of them, but not all the operators were answering or responding the player complaints in the best way. We had a number of cases whereby there were players who were claiming that they had a particular win, but the win wasn't honored, or it took way too long for the win to be for the money to be given back. There were operators who were staggering the payments without having necessarily agreed on this payment staggering with operators. So that's why ADRs nowadays exist. Now, I would say each and every regulator requires, across EU at least, requires their licensees to use the services of an ADR. It's a must for all operators. So the moment a player has a complaint with a particular licensee, and so the first contact point will always be the operator. But the moment that complaint is not resolved, or the player feels that it wasn't resolved in a fair way, or in the way the player believed it was fair for him or her, then the ADR comes in. So any player can log in a complaint with the ADR. ADRs are independent, and they are there to secure, to make sure that ultimately there is a fair judgment, a fair assessment of each and every player complaint.
Thank you. The industry moves fast. From a regulatory standpoint, how can authorities encourage innovation while still ensuring market integrity and player safety?
Well, it's a tough one, and especially in the industry, it's a tough one because regulation will always lag behind, unfortunately. What happens is, like any other industry, operators, especially the smaller operators, tend to be very innovative, tend to come up with new ideas in order to be able to compete. Because for a small operator, being innovative, it's a matter of existence. A new operator, a new startup cannot afford not to be innovative. But the moment they are innovative, sometimes regulators end up playing a catch-up game, because the technology moves so fast, and regulators, it is not easy to regulate. One thing which regulators usually do and should do, in my opinion, is to regulate what we call objective-based. So rather than regulating the technology, which is at times very difficult, regulating a technology, what regulators need to focus on is having objective-based regulations. So if you want to regulate or control the way payments are being done, rather than giving too much detail, being prescriptive and giving all the details of how it should be regulated, you regulate on objective. You want it to be fair, but then it allows both flexibility to the operator, but also to the regulator to assess what fair is. So for a regulator, it would be best to explain how it should be done, how something should be done, but not the what, not exactly the detail, because otherwise, the moment you give a detailed list on a technical solution, I would say a couple of months later, a new solution comes up, and you end up having to rewrite your regulations.
That sounds like a very smart approach. And for businesses and individuals exploring Malta as a gaming hub, what should they understand about operating under a regulated framework like MGAs, and what advice would you give them when starting out?
Well, ultimately especially nowadays, getting a license anywhere in the EU, and Malta is part of the EU, so it's the same thing. It's not an easy task. I mean, the details which regulators go through, and the TARA assessment which is done on the prospective applicant, that's quite thorough. So what I would say is do not take it lightly. So obtaining a license both from the MGA but from any other EU regulator is no easy task. So you need to make sure you are very well prepared. And my suggestion would always be, do not submit a half-baked application. Sometimes what happens is there are companies who submit the application just to say it was submitted, without having all the necessary details, without having all the necessary documentation. And what happens is that the regulators, some regulators like at the MGA, will still come back to you. And rather than having an application processed in 1 year, it will take you sometimes 2 years to have it processed. Why? Because then the moment the MGA evaluates your application, it will start getting back to you, telling you, well, you have this document missing, we need this, we need this, we need that. So my suggestion would always be, one, to obtain services from someone, from a CSP with experience in the industry, someone who has already processed a number of applications with the MGA or with any other regulator, because that would help. And the other suggestion is to never submit an application which is not complete.
Recently, you have joined SiGMA. Can you explain what your role entails now?
Yes, I've joined SiGMA close to a year ago. I am the COO and also responsible for international and government relations. With this part, we call it the B2G internally. Mainly, we reach out to governments across the globe, to regulators across the globe, and we try to bridge the gap between the industry and the governments, between the industry and the regulators, because we firmly believe in regulated gaming. We believe that the only way forward for this industry is to be properly regulated. And since we are an international company, we have expos across 8 countries now and in 5 continents. So we believe we have our international aspect helps us in also pushing forward this mantra that we believe that the only way forward for this industry is to have it regulated, and regulation is the way forward.
And in your view, what do you believe? What geos are the most promising where you can bring the biggest change in the near future?
I think what we're seeing at SiGMA and where we are having the expos. This is why we do some expos in specific locations as well. We believe that Latin America has huge potential. Latin America is very strong on sports betting, but it is not fully regulated or properly regulated. There are patches of regulation. Case in point, if you look at countries like Brazil, where we had our summit in April of this year, the moment they started regulating, they had their regulations in January 2025. The moment they started regulating, they started seeing a positive impact. Why? Because there was already gambling taking place in the region. There were already companies offering their services via other means, other licenses. But the moment the government decided to regulate gambling at a federal level, the online gaming, then the government started seeing the money coming in from tax, and they started understanding exactly the magnitude of the gaming industry there. So I believe that, as I said before, regulation is the way forward. And if you look at places like Latin America, even if you look at Africa, we have our show at Cape Town, and we discuss regulation there as well. Even there, Africa, they are regulating state by state. They are regulating. They are doing it in the proper way. But the moment there is full and proper regulation across the continent, then you will start seeing some real change there as well.
How are you and SiGMA able to help regulators to achieve their objective?
What we do there, as I said before, what we do there is we try to bridge the gap. So what we do at our conferences, even if you look at this conference here in Rome, I don't think there was ever another gaming expo which had such a high caliber of attendees from the government, even regulators. And we firmly believe that we need to bridge the gap. We need to put the industry closer. We talk about B2C, B2B, and now also B2G, so business to government. And we believe that these 3 pillars, the business to customer, the business to business, and the business to government, can live and should live closer to each other. Because one issue we've seen in the past is that sometimes regulators do not understand completely the industry, and the only way to understand it is by being closer to the industry, by understanding the needs of the industry, and by understanding how the industry operates, so that they can regulate properly. So what we do wherever we go at SiGMA, we always invite the government, we always invite regulators, and we organize networking events whereby there is the industry and also regulators. We have regulators on panels to discuss key topics, hot topics. So we believe that this is our role. We have the international reach. We can get in touch with regulators and governments, and we already have the industry attending our expos, exhibiting at our shows. So we believe that it is our role now to bridge the gap as much as we can between the three pillars.